Welcome to the podcast. James O'Reilly here from Northeast Wealth with a special guest, Dr. Stephen Liu from Everlab. Mate, lovely to have you back on the show.
Glad to be back.
We are talking all things private health insurance today. And this private health insurance is obviously a discussion that for so many Australians we grapple with. And today we want to get into some of the finer points of how does private health insurance work, but also what's the right policy for me? And is this the best utility of my money?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, glad to be here to give you a bit of a medical angle on it. After all, it is private health insurance, right? So let's put a health angle to it, and hopefully I can give people some more clarity on it.
Yeah, I think we're going to be good here. Let's rock and roll. Well, firstly, it would be remiss of us not to open by talking a little bit about the history of private health insurance. Private health insurance actually goes back a very long way in Australia. In fact, before the Medicare system was brought to Australia, which was in 1984, we had a really high level of private health insurance. At that point, there wasn't a universal healthcare system, which of course is Medicare. So there was always that risk that if something goes wrong, I'm going to need to go to hospital and I'm going to have these big out-of-pocket costs. And so these, albeit smaller private health insurers, were very, very popular. So the coverage at one point was around, in the early 80s, was around about 80%, which is much, much higher than it is today. When Medicare was introduced in 1984, that fell to around about 50%. People no longer had to insure themselves for public hospital care, so that a lot of people dropped it. And it continued to fall, down to around about 30% in the mid-1990s. The Howard government at the time recognised that we're going to have this problem with health-based funding here if we can't encourage with carrots and sticks for people to get back on the private health wagon. And so they introduced a few different measures here that were quite effective. The first one was the carrot. The first one was the stick, I beg your pardon, which was the Medicare levy surcharge. And of course, we'll talk about that. That's the additional tax that you pay if your income is high enough and you don't have private health insurance. But then they followed up with a carrot a few years later, which was a 30% rebate on insurance premiums for private health insurance to, again, encourage more Australians took it up. And we've sat since 2002 or thereabouts. I think their take up at that point might have been around about 40 to 45%. And we've had, despite having some changes to the system on the whole, the overall take up rate's about the same. We still sit at around about 40% of Australians, 42% of Australians have private health insurance now. Having said all of that, the quality of the cover has changed a lot over time. The costs associated with the cover similarly have changed over time. If you're listening to this and you've had private health insurance since 2000, for example, I've no doubt that you can attest to the idea that it costs a much higher amount of your income today than it was previously.
Anecdotally, I mean, I'm seeing more and more of my patients opt out of private health insurance because of the rising costs. I mean, I get my private health insurance bills and, it goes up a lot every year, right? So that's a big disincentive.
Of course it is. Well, opting out is something that is becoming increasingly popular because of those rising costs, and also in part because, as we discussed, what you get for your cover is no longer the same. And the insurers, because obviously there's a range of insurers out there, there are good quality private health insurance contracts and there are poor quality private health insurance contracts. And that's something that wasn't necessarily grappled with as much in the early 2000s, for example. Yeah,
and look, it's just getting more and more complicated, right? There's different policies, there's different cover. Your cover covers different things. And, like normal folks, they just might not have the time or the effort or the context or the knowledge to make a great decision there. But what we do see is the cost going up.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Let's move across, if I may, to the reason why people have private health insurance today. I mean, I welcome your comments here, but I would respectfully put it to you that the number one reason people have it is not because they necessarily want to pay for the protection.
Yeah.
It's because in a lot of cases they want to avoid the Medicare levy surcharge.
They want to avoid the stick. I remember buying private health insurance for the first time in my life. I was like, I'm going to get taxed what? All right, like, well, better get onto it, right? I think I had a very nice financial advisor tell me, like, that's a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
And especially I think when people get into private health insurance, they're usually at a stage of their lives, this is more the clinical angle, they're usually at a stage of their lives, the beginning of your career, you're not really thinking about your health much at all. So the most interest that I find my younger patients have an interest in their private health is, do I have perks, right? Am I going to get some new glasses and I'm going to get dental, and do I get some remedial massage and physio?
Yes.
I think that's what's important for them. But you actually need hospital cover to avoid the levy, right? And then there's all these different types of cover. So it's a tricky decision.
Yeah, I find that an interesting concept, the idea of a perk, and it seems to me that private health insurers are doing perks so much better than they've ever done. But if you're looking to choose the right private health insurer, we'll speak to this shortly. Choosing the insurer that gives you the perks can actually be a real trap, because the perks might save you $300 or $400 a year, for example, getting a new pair of glasses or something along those lines. But if the policy that has the perks doesn't have high quality cardiac cover or something much more significant, then that can hurt you astronomically more than that little saving you get every year.
It is health insurance after all, right? So, like, what exactly is the value? Why do you have it? And when do you use it?
Yes.
And, again, like anecdotally, you probably know this, in your field, people probably know it a little bit better, but even among doctors, a lot of people don't fully understand private health insurance very well. Like what policy, what cover. I've had doctor friends and, like doctor colleagues and patients get caught out clinically when they needed it and say, what do you mean I'm not covered?
Yeah.
So, it is, I think it's a really important topic. We should really, look into it and give people empower people with the ability to actually understand, like, what am I paying a couple $1,000s for every year?
Yeah.
And what exactly do I get? So we can make a really informed, so everyone can make an informed decision. Everyone actually maybe needs slightly different cover based on who they are.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Stage of life as well. Yeah, for sure.
So if we're talking about, it'd be remiss of us not to momentarily talk about the Medicare levy surcharge, because as we've said, that's a primary reason why people take out private health insurance, whether it's for the first time or they keep holding it.
Yeah.
So with the Medicare levy surcharge, currently, if your individual income is 97 grand or family income of 194 grand, so you might have a $30,000 income, but your spouse has a $200,000 income, or as a household, you're over this, the Medicare levy surcharge is going to ping you 1% of that entire income as an additional tax that you'll pay when you do your tax return. And if that continues to grow to the point where the household individual income is 150, a little over 150, and the household income is a smidge over 300, that's now 1.5%. So for a scenario where you've got a household with $300,000 of combined household income or thereabouts, you're looking down the barrel of $4,500 of Medicare levy surcharge. And that's a lot of coin.
Yeah.
Now, that in itself is a really sound reason to look at a private health insurer, because it's very likely that if you said, I just want the bare minimum cover, it's just my partner and I, or my wife and I, my husband and I just want the bare minimum to not have to pay that surcharge, you may very well be able to get a policy that is under $4,500. And so you're actually saving money by having this cover. But my experience when I sit down with Aussies is that most people don't do that. Most people, there's the bare minimum of cover that you need to not pay the surcharge.
Yeah.
And then overlaid with that is saying, well, if I've got the cover, I might as well have some cover that's going to give me
if I'm going to get it, I may as well get something valuable for me.
That's right. Yeah. And so that's where we start to enter this sphere of extras of gold and silver and bronze cover and platinum cover. And my experience here is that it's pretty hard to discern, on a policy by policy basis, which one's best for you, right?
Yeah. Silver, gold, platinum, like bronze. What do they really mean? Yeah.
I'd love to understand, and perhaps we start with the idea of when private health insurance delivers a lot of value, because even if you ignore the benefit of of avoiding the surcharge, make no mistake, private health insurance can be incredibly valuable. So when are the times where this is really going to be something that someone's super grateful to have taken out?
Great question, James. I think first appreciate the backdrop, right? We live in Australia. We have a universal single payer coverage, which is Medicare, and I think that's incredible. We have a fantastic health service and health system that is great with dealing with reactive care. So if a disaster does happen, if you get hit by a car, if you have a sudden heart attack, if you have a severe illness, actually the public health system performs really, really well, right? So if you have a lot of these things, my service, Everlab, really focuses on like mitigating these services, but God forbid if it does happen to you, if you have a heart attack, if you have a brain aneurysm that bursts or something like that, the public health system does that really, really well, actually. That's not one of the user cases where private health insurance, I think, delivers a ton of value. I think where private health insurance delivers a lot of value is in two other user cases. One is you have a significant issue, but it is not life-threatening, or certainly not life-threatening at the time, right? And how do we decide what's life-threatening and how life-threatening does it have to be considered life-threatening? But we'll start with things like functionally detracting things. Like if you need a knee replacement, if you have severe osteoarthritis, you need a knee replacement and you're in pain every day, you can't exercise, and therefore, you're putting on weight and your metabolic health is getting worse, you're not sleeping well because you're in pain and, it's really tough. But is it really killing you? No, it's not. Those are the cases where it's an elective surgery and, yes, you're going to get quite good quality care through a public hospital, but the wait list is really, really long. Yeah. And it's actually the delta of time. The longer you wait, the more detrimental this problem is. Yeah. Right? So, your mental health, your relationships, your sleep, a lot of people pack on a lot of, excess body fat because of a musculoskeletal problem, right? Those are the cases where, hey, if we had the option of going private, you can choose your surgeon, you can find the right hospital, you can get that done really quickly. And I think that's life-changing. Yes. Right? So similarly, there are other things like, say, a hernia operation, right? Hernias are an inherent risk. So they cause a problem if they're uncomfortable, yes, but sometimes they can strangulate. So a loop of bowel goes into the hernia itself and it twists on itself, and then it has a potential to become a emergency. But it's not an emergency at the time. So of course, it's an elective surgery. So it's really good to have the option to say, actually, I'm going to go private. I'm going to get that fixed because I'm about to go on a 12-month caravan trip around Australia and I don't want to be in the middle of nowhere and have my hernia act up, right? So having the choice to have elective problems fixed is really, really powerful. Yeah. Now, one case here where it sort of straddles is this life-threatening, is it not? So if you had a heart attack, right, ambulance take you to a public hospital, they'll do a fantastic job if you survive, right? So, they can put a stent in, they can do bypass surgery as an emergency operation. But what if you had stable disease? So some people have actually had stable disease. So you have blockages in your heart. It's not killing you, but every time you walk uphill on your driveway, you're going to get chest pain. So you're on an elective wait list, and that elective list might be 8 months, 12 months, really varies. And that's a gamble because there are a lot of people who are on the wait list who can have a heart attack from that blockage. Yeah. And obviously, if you don't die right away from that heart attack, you get bumped up to the top and you have emergency surgery. But surgeons also don't really love doing emergency surgery, right? It's much better if it's elective. It's much better if it's controlled. And that's a circumstance where, having the option to have it electively dealt with before it, you get rid of that element of surprise is really, really powerful. And this is also interesting because some people don't actually have cardiac cover, right? And this is where you should really know your policy. And just last thing to add there, access to services is really useful. Like for instance, at Everlab, we refer a lot of people who are at an increased risk of, say, stomach cancer or bowel cancer, having fast access, again, through private health insurance. Usually most private health insurances cover endoscopy services by gastroenterologists or surgeons to put a camera down the gullet and have a look at the stomach, particularly bowel, because, like we spoke about last time, bowel cancer is on the rise. 1 in 4 people at age 50 actually have precancerous polyps. Yeah. So having that tool readily accessible, right? If your doctor discusses with you, so actually you're slightly high risk, you might have some symptoms, we can have a much lower threshold and access to these services. That's where private health insurance, I think, really shines. Yep. I think about a family friend now at this moment who
had a hip issue, and she's been on the public system for the public system wait list for maybe 9 or 10 months so far.
Yeah.
That public system wait list, I agree with your point that it's the public system does a really good task of solving and addressing those urgent matters, but it's a difficult wait list to be on. You've got no visibility over when you're going to get called up. When you are called up, you got to be ready. So you were talking about that caravan trip, for example. My thinking was you'd hate to go on that caravan trip because you might get a phone call saying, okay, we're ready to go. So in 2 weeks, we've got a slot for you. It's not as far as I'm concerned. I welcome your comments. You know so much more about this than I do, but in my very limited experience, that's been the message. It hasn't been a case of saying good news. You know, it's 1 April. We're going to schedule it in for June the 15th. So come in. It's a case of all right, we've got a slot and it's next week.
The wait list changes very quickly.
Yes.
It's very hard to book in a date. If you book in a date, something can bump that.
Yes.
Right. So on the day, hey, emergency happened, and we're not going to bump you to the afternoon. Like all the slots are filled. We need to reschedule.
Yes.
Right. I've had someone who's been waiting for, close to a year for ENT surgery. Mm-hmm. Really, really important. And people think, hey, ENT surgery, it's not life-threatening, right? Not in the immediate sense, but the ENT problem is causing recurrent infection. It bothers their sleep. It really reduces their quality of life. It impacts their ability to concentrate, mental health, detracts work performance, puts a strain on their relationship. Like, it's very hard to calculate these. And I totally grant it, it's very difficult for the hospital system to say, what's urgent? What's the cost, right? And cases like that, I think he was about to get his date in, and then he got COVID. So, you got COVID, we can't operate on you. And then he got bumped again.
Yes.
And that's really, really tough.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're talking about when private health delivers a lot of value. We've actually transitioned across to, I think, the other part of this, which is around the pitfalls. So, I mean, one of those, focusing on private health specifically, we were talking before about costs. Private health cover is getting a lot more expensive, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, just from my own bills. We read the articles as well. More and more people are opting out because of the cost. I'll be honest, I get my bill, and it just crosses my mind immediately. It's like, should I cancel this? Because you've just gone up so much year on year.
Yeah.
I get this dreaded email. It pops up. It's never good news. It's always prices going up. And that's obviously one big consideration for people because cost of living is also going up.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's very difficult for people to have the tension between saying, hey, look, I could join a better gym. I could get a personal trainer. That's delivering immediately for me, to be more functionally well, to work on my musculoskeletal health. And sometimes people have to calculate that cost and say, well, what should I do? And find that tension, right?
Yeah.
Find that compromise.
It's a cruel irony saying no to some of those big preventative things because you want to pay for the make sure you're protected for the reactive stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the other pitfall that I'm seeing as well with respect to rising costs is also, and this is what catches people out sometimes, there's still often quite a big out-of-pocket cost, right? Even if you have private health insurance. And I think there was a news article about it recently as well. A lot of my patients I've seen have been under the false impression to say, I have private hospital cover, so therefore private care will have no further out-of-pocket costs. And often that's not true.
Yeah.
Right? Especially larger operations and larger services. That's actually not true. And sometimes it can be 4 or 5 figures.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's not a small amount of money.
And one other that stands out to me here too is the idea of the fact that it doesn't cover everything, not just in the sense that you might have some out-of-pocket costs, but it's funding the majority. There are some areas that it just doesn't cover. Full stop, right? Unless it's stipulated in your policy that we cover this particular benefit.
James, the devil's in the details, right? So, and I've had multiple of my personal patients, and these are stories that I hear as well, that they're caught out because they actually require a specific type of care, and then they discover that actually it's not covered. So one of the more common things are obstetric care. We're so happy we just, we're fallen pregnant. Let's choose a private hospital. Well, turns out your policy doesn't cover obstetrics.
Yeah. Or if it does, it has a 12-month waiting period, which means that you needed to get this.
You needed to be pregnant 6 months ago, right?
Yes.
So IVF is another one, which is, I think, fairly commonly not covered. And there are a few other things like where you need renal dialysis in the context of kidney failure. I think that's often a thing that may or may not be included. Cardiac surgery, that's another one that may or may not be covered in your insurance. Joint replacements, that's often something that you need to really see it written down to say it covers that. Mental health admissions, inpatient care for severe psychiatric and mental health issues is not necessarily covered. And I think my advice here is really like understand your policy. Just click into a little bit more and find the page. And it's like it might be a 40-page thing. There is one page in there that says what's covered, what's not, what are the terms.
Yes, I agree. I think about when it comes to insurance, the obvious remedy for this. Let me start again. This issue is not a private health insurance issue. This is an insurance issue. Almost every type of insurance, whether it's car, home and contents, travel insurance, life insurance, different policies have different features, and you could be caught out with one policy or get the benefit of another policy depending on the event that happens. But the remedy for it, the immediate remedy, well, just take top of the line cover, problem solved. Then I'm getting as much as I possibly can and happy days. But especially in the backdrop of high inflation, in the backdrop of high cost or a high cost of living, to say it differently, and Aussies trying to keep their costs down, private health cover is one of those things that can just, you open the letter, it sits on your top, like on your bench, and you think, mental note, I've got to review that, but I'm not going to review it this quarter because I've got my life's flat out or whatever. So I'll pay it this year, and I'll pay this quarter or this year, and then I'll get on with it. Yeah. What's the solution? How can people practically decide what cover is best for them and their family?
Yeah. So unfortunately, James, there's no quick solution.
Yep.
But there is a solution. So my recommendation is start its private health insurance. Start by understanding your own health, right? And, take insurance out of it. Insurance itself is a disaster, response, right? You actually don't really want to need it. I mean, obstetrics and IVF aside, that's something that's you do proactively, but you actually don't want to have cardiac surgery. It's not say, I've got cardiac cover, I better use it, right? Like it's not a spa treatment. You never want to use it really, right? And start by understanding your own health to say, what am I at risk at? And I think this is something that people don't often have a view on. They think, I'm not sick, so therefore I'm healthy. Well, and that's why I started Everlab, to give people an opportunity to say, let's be more proactive while you're quote unquote well, to understand where your risks are and just understand yourself. Yeah. What is your family history? What is your propensity for disease? What can we pick up early so that you don't need any of these very expensive, very interventional and very high risk things?
Yeah.
So start by understanding yourself, and then based on that context, you can understand, all right, what type of insurance is best for me?
I'm mindful that the listeners today might not necessarily have heard our earlier podcasts on the Australian Retirement Podcast, which I think spoke more about the work that you're doing at Everlab. But can we take a step backward there? I mean, Everlab is a medical practice that focuses on preventative health.
That's right.
I'm understanding that correctly. Can you speak a little bit about the core work that you do and why it's valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. So Everlab is a medical service that I started. We actually operate Australia-wide. And the principle of that is we take a personalized scope to understand your health and be prevention focused and do that by being very data driven. So we look at all your historical records, we do diagnostics, we do advanced diagnostics, we understand your risks with the purpose of optimizing your health today and mitigating your risk for tomorrow, because a lot of these risks have no symptoms, right? They're quite insidious. And these are the biggest risks that people often have. So if you think about when we talk about private health insurance, all the things that we've discussed, right? Cardiac services, you really don't want to be in a position where you need it. Yes. If you need it, it's great to have it, but you really don't want to need it. And it's, blockages in the arteries of your heart, one of the biggest killer in the world. something that we can really do a much better job on preventing. So that's the focus of our service, right? And it gives people an opportunity to understand yourself, have your own health profile, at the touch of your fingers, right? So we have a beta mobile app that it's a bit like your net bank, right? You want to see how much money you have in the bank, you should be able to log in and have a look. So similarly, you should be able to say, hey, what are my risks? What are my biomarkers? What puts me at risk and what am I working on? And have the level of confidence, say, all right, now when I try to choose what cover is best for me and my family, I can quite confidently say, I don't think I need invasive cardiac cover. Or I can say, hey, look, I'm really working on my musculoskeletal health. I know the state of my joints are actually quite good. I'm this age. Of course, never say never in healthcare, but I have a different level of confidence to make these really tricky choices, right? Like picking from a menu of things. I think most people might not even know what dialysis is, right? Yeah. When they see it, they're like, oh, what's this thing? Do I need it or do I not need it? And it's really about making informed decisions.
Yeah.
If you know yourself very clearly with the confidence to say, look, within the boundaries of what we can predict, I've really done a lot. And I have that level of confidence to go into the website and to look at your policy and say, all right, what do I really need covered? Do I need, based on what I know about myself and my family, do I need inpatient psychiatric care covered?
And is that as important as having top-of-the-line cardiac cover?
Exactly, right. So being able to make those, make an informed decision on those trade-offs.
Yep.
And it's with that informed sense, then you can exert your personal values of what your risk appetite is. Because some people insure their cars for more than the value that it's worth. Some people insure for half, right? That's a decision you have, but it's very easy because you know what the market value of your car is. Whereas, like two Mazdas are probably the same, but two people are vastly different, right? Unless if you're an identical twin, and even in those cases, there might be differences. Everyone's unique and everyone's an individual, so you have to try to understand who you are through a medical lens, through the lens of disease risk, and then come to this and say, all right, how do I make these decisions? And hopefully, for instance, through Everlab, we would guide you and say, actually, these are the things that you should be working on. These are the numbers this is the biggest return on investment item that you can work on. And that's what you should invest in. Actually, you should invest in a personal trainer that does this 3 times a week. And this is the type of exercise you do. And these are the areas of body you should work on, which will mitigate this risk. I think that can often be a much higher return on investment than randomly blasting out a couple $1,000s on cover you might not need.
Yeah. Not to mention that, thinking about that, there are so many beneficial byproducts of for example, spending your money, spending your capital on prevention rather than a reactive service. If something goes wrong, you're going to be healthier more generally. You're going to have better mobility. Hopefully, your state of mind's going to be better.
Yeah, 100%. And those things are not just dividends for the future, right?
Yeah, they're right now.
You'll feel better next week, right?
This leads me into this concept of when I wrote it down, maybe I overdid this a bit, but I wrote down disaster preparation versus disaster avoidance, from a health perspective. I realize that's wrong because health events are not necessarily just disasters. I guess that was my lens as I wrote it. But that idea that, asking myself, is it better to have platinum private health cover that if anything goes wrong, as best I can possibly manage, I'm protected, versus having bronze private health cover or the bare minimum, and then using those savings on preventative measures like the personal trainer, like the gym, like the whatever those things are that will actually hopefully have a meaningful reduction in the likelihood that you'll need to claim on your private health insurance.
Yeah, I think it's resource allocation, right? And it's really about understanding what exactly you're allocating to. So for instance, if you come through Everlab, that's a cost, right? If you come through our service, which is prevention focused, and you go through this process, that's a cost. And through that, are you going to be able to get a level of clarity and confidence to say, all right, now I understand my risk. Actually, I really need cardiac cover, right? Moving forward. Or say, actually, I have the confidence to say, we can probably drop the cover from gold to silver to bronze. Obviously, that is at the end of the day, that is a risk appetite decision, and also have to factor in the resource and the cost, because cost is different for everyone, right? In terms of what it means to you.
Yeah.
If you're super well resourced, and you say, it's not worth my time, I'll just get by top of the line cover and no worries. That's a very lucky position to be in. But, some folks, we do really need to think about it.
Yeah.
And being able to have the confidence to say, actually, I think I'm making a right decision and I'm not going to get caught out by any blind spots. I think that's really important.
I agree. Yeah. The idea that if you're paying, let's say, thousands of dollars a year towards something that, hopefully you don't claim on, but just rolls along in the background and you're not really that connected to it.
Yeah.
If your phone plan cost you thousands of dollars a year, you'd be really dialed into what do I get, what other options are available. But private health just sort of it can often just sit there idle in the background.
Yeah. I think there's going to be some changes moving forward. The private health insurance industry, I think there's also signs that it is struggling, right, with rising costs and reduced uptake sometimes and things like that. I think some of the private health insurances are going to need to rethink some of their offering and value. It makes complete sense for private health insurances to actually invest in preventative measures and preventative health. And some of them are doing some small tactical things, but I see a future, and we do speak to, our organization, Everlab, we do speak to private health insurance to get that conversation started to say, actually, we can absolutely align your business incentives with the clinical outcome incentives that we want to provide for our members.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we're speaking earlier, about like, for example, a heart stent, and the fact that if that event happens for a private health insurer, that's going to cost them $100,000 or $150,000.
Probably more. Yeah.
Something really meaningful. And if they instead had the ability to incentivize that particular member to be more proactive with their health and do whatever it is that they do to lower the probability of the likelihood of that event happening. If they can reduce that by 20%, that's $30,000 saved for that particular individual. So I think that speaks to the idea that, there's certainly those incentives are coming. I think about my own private health. I'm with AIA Vitality, and they have that program. So I'm on the bike most days and do some running and some gym and things like that. And I get a lower premium, meaningfully lower premium, because I'm active and I've got a watch that tracks all of that.
And so you should be, right? So you should be rewarded. And, like I think Charlie Munger said, right? You show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcomes, right? So really a great outcome for their bottom line, and also a great outcome through the clinical lens, is really like, hey, let's, my career aspiration, which I think is achievable in my lifetime, is nobody has a sudden heart attack. We should be able to get in front and prevent all of these things. Of course, there are very edge cases, but those are the things that we should be aspiring to do.
Yeah.
And if we can engage and if we can create those right incentive structures, the whole system can move towards that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice of you to say that. I agree. I'm also thinking about underwriting. Private health insurance, I find surprising that the lack of underwriting that exists, given the value of the premiums. So for those of you listening that might not be familiar with that term underwriting, the idea is it's the level of information that you gather and what you evaluate before you offer an insurance contract. And most insurance contracts have some level of underwriting. When you got your car insured, for example, it would have asked you questions like, do you park on the street, or do you park in a secure garage? And these things are changing the risk factor of the likelihood that your vehicle is going to be stolen. And therefore your premium, you'll find, dials in if you're parked not on the street, and so on. The number of Ks that you do, similarly, the more kilometers that you do in a raw numbers sense, the higher the probability of you having a car accident, and therefore the higher the probability that the insurer will need to pay a claim. So with life insurance, for example,
they ask a lot of stuff.
They ask so many questions, and for our members that go through this process to get good quality insurance, it's very common for the insurer to say, thank you for all of your responses. We're now going to write away to your doctor and also the physiotherapist that you saw 2.5 years ago and get their medical records to evaluate those so that we can properly decide whether or not we want to offer cover. Whereas with private health insurance, it's a much, much thinner evaluation right now. And I think about the direction that we're going with private health insurance, in particular with respect to cost. And it seems to me that it's just an area that's ripe for better underwriting. Even if it was a case of saying, for example, where like it's ABC private health insurance, but we're going to make a really we're going to be really dialed in specifically to people who are very active. So we're going to only accept people who use smartwatches and have the right number of steps. And we look at them and say more broadly, these people are active and have a long history of being active. That, from everything that I know about longevity and risk factors, my understanding is that the likelihood of claim is actually much lower, especially really significant claim like, your heart stent surgery. It's much lower for that type of person than it would be for just your average Australian. I'm really surprised that there's not more done here.
I think that's a very rich question, right? Because there's a lot that goes into that. And obviously there's like public policy and there's like philosophically, what do we believe as a society and what sort of services we should be offering. There are places in the world that does not have a single payer universal healthcare, quite a lot of places, right? And it's quite a philosophical way we need to think about health. But like you said, absolutely, I think we need to be a bit more innovative as well and come up with the right levers to be not so much, we don't want to be exclusionary, but we want to be inclusive and be able to incentivize people to take an interest in their health. So I'll give an example. If, and that's not happening today, hopefully it will happen in the future.
Yeah.
If your private health insurance paid for part of your Everlab, program with us, we would have such a deep level of your health data and be able to forecast your risk. And if you're, based on that risk, we can actually guide you to the right product. And hopefully by even incentivizing for you to undertake this activity, regardless of the outcome, we reduce, the insurance company reduce your premium. I think that's a great incentive structure for people to actually say, let's be more proactive about our health, right? And just have a clearer understanding and say, actually, you know what? Turns out I do need a stent, right? And I'm going to use my private health insurance to get that stent, but I'm going to get it before I have a heart attack.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Can I confirm, what are the other options when it comes to insurance? I mean, like we talked before about the fact that private health insurance it's certainly not in favor. It was falling post Medicare, and we like the government, Australia more broadly, managed with carrots and sticks to get it to around that low 40% mark where it stayed for many years. That means that there's 60% of Australians that don't have this. Now, some of those will certainly not have the motivation to have it because maybe there's no Medicare levy surcharge for them and they'll make do with private health. But there are, make no mistake, there's plenty of Australians that are paying that Medicare levy surcharge and saying, I'm not interested in having private health insurance.
Yeah.
What's the mindset here and what are the alternatives?
It does come down to cost. So we've spoken a lot about evaluating risk and need, right? But this question really comes down to cost. And I'm increasingly seeing within my patients, a lot of whom are retirees and, they're very financially savvy people and they make a decision and say, hey, I've done the maths. I'm not going to take out private health insurance, but I'm just going to put the money that I would otherwise have put into private health insurance into a rainy day fund for health. And then where I need it, right? So like I said, if you have something sudden and bad happen, public care, fantastic. But if I do need a knee replacement or something that I don't want to be lingering on a wait list for 10 months being in pain and not having the ability to exercise and look after my health in other positive ways, I'm just going to pay out of pocket.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pay for, a lot of private hospitals are now offering private fixed fee services, which I think is really interesting. Like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I really didn't see any of these things pop up. Now, sometimes you go to a private hospital website, there's a button, right? Private fixed fee. So you just pay for it all. In many times it's fixed fee. It tells you exactly what you're getting. And it just becomes a financial calculation.
Yeah. To
say, if I'm only going to use this, fingers crossed, I estimate I'll maybe use this once in the next 15 years. Let me just do the maths. How much would the premiums otherwise cost? Add it together, I'll make a bet. Or you're creating a great incentive structure for yourself to say, I don't have private health insurance and I don't want to need this, or I'm actually going to invest that money into really looking after myself.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's an interesting direction, and I think it's quite telling of what's happening in this space.
Yeah, fascinating. Can I ask, thinking of wrapping up here, what's one thing people should do right now? If you're listening to this and you have private health insurance and maybe feeling a little bit disengaged with it, which with respect, I think is most people that have private health insurance. What's the one thing you should do?
One thing you should do, log into your web portal, like pull up your policy, have a read, right? Just scroll past the gold, silver, bronze, have a look at exactly what the inclusions are and what the terms are, right? What has what wait period, what's included, what's excluded. You might be covered for something that you don't need anymore. I see this very, very frequently, especially people sort of mid-career, midlife. They've already had 2 kids and they're done, right? Dad's had a vasectomy, like, we're not having any more kids, but they're still paying for obstetric cover.
Yep.
Right. So I think that's it. There's often like easy wins there. So instead of having obstetric cover in a family plan, actually we can split our plan and, maybe the mum needs a little like high level of care and maybe the dad less so.
Yes.
Right? And you want to make sure you get the right cover for yourself. But you're paying a lot of money for this. You should know what you're getting.
Yeah, I agree completely. We speak so often, it seems to be a bit of a consensus thing that we have when we have these podcasts talking about concepts like private health, which is just to engage more, to lean into this more and better understand what you get, and regardless of what product or what thing we're talking about. And this is no different. This is a real cost to you. And there hopefully will not be, but there may come a time where the terms and conditions of this policy matter very, very much to you. And hopefully that isn't something that a lot of Australians, a lot of our listeners come to, but the reality is that probably will be. And so being proactive with this and understanding what do I get for my policy and how does that sit with me? And then I'm also going to overlay this. I'll give you a little plug if I may, which is that I think your service is fantastic, and the idea that people can proactively understand what their risks are, ignoring the benefits of private health insurance and which insurer, but moreover, just am I a healthy individual and what's my quality of life likely to be in the future as my years go on, and should I be doing anything differently? I think it's one of the best ways that you can invest in yourself. So being able to do that and then look at your private health insurance with a much clearer lens as to what you need and what you're likely to require in the future, that makes a ton of sense to me.
Absolutely.
Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show again. Always a pleasure to have you on. I can't help but feel that you will be on here again in the not too distant future.
It'll be my pleasure. Thanks for having me, James.
Thank you for all of your support. And if you want to reach out to Dr. Stephen Liu, then please check him out and his great business, Everlab. Thank you, everyone. And we will, I will be here again for you soon. Over and out.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.